Solutions. This is Open Mic and we are back with you. And my guest today is Mr. John Peters, a professional civil engineer who's been on the island for almost 23 years, who served 4 years in the Ministry of Communications and Works as the chief engineer. I've had many intimate dealings with Mr. Peters over the years, and I've considered Mr. Peters one of the most professional and hands-on engineers that I've ever met on the island. Mr. Peters is extremely knowledgeable and has a very good take on what happens in St. Lucia. I have consistently listened to him making his suggestions over the years, and I'm very proud of him, and it's a great pity that some of his advice was not followed. However, he has just been chosen to be on the Visions Committee, and I sincerely trust that he'll be allowed a relatively free hand because Mr. Peters understands what it takes as far as the infrastructure is concerned. Today, I have 4 questions which I would like to pose to Mr. Peters. 1, I would like to get his take on what saving measures and micromanagement can be done as far as the infrastructure is concerned in St. Lucia. Road maintenance, construction of new roads, and what does he think of Bailey bridges versus the conventional concrete bridges, which, as we know, are very costly and time-consuming. Mr. Peters, John?
Thank you, Thank you very much for inviting me to this open mic session and your kind words of introduction that you have just relayed. I think all of us as St. Lucians are very concerned about what is happening in the country as a whole, and that concern, obviously, forums like these are helpful in bringing out discussion and bringing out ideas as to how we should shape our future going forward. Infrastructure obviously plays a very significant role in any development in any country, and if you get the infrastructure right, I would want to believe that your economy will also be affected positively. What has happened in St. Lucia over the years, we have, and I think it has to be situated. If you start thinking about infrastructure, you have to situate it in relation to where we are located. We are a small island state. Our vulnerability is extremely high because of our location. We are hit with tropical storms and hurricanes frequently. If you look at the last 20 years, St. Lucia has had at least 4 significant events. You had Tropical Storm Debbie in 1994. You had Hurricane Lenny. You had Thomas. You had the trough last year. And all would have created significant impact upon the environment. All would have caused significant losses to our infrastructure, significant costs to the country. And because of that, I believe we need to begin to pay particular attention because of our vulnerability and because of our size. There's a concept that has been developed in the UK in which what they have done is that they have structured the entire infrastructure and defined what is called critical infrastructure. What parts of our infrastructure are extremely critical for the country as a whole to keep on functioning. And then they have proceeded from that to determine what would be structures that should be resilient and what should be resistant. Resilient means that even if it overtops and you are not able to traverse along a particular corridor for an hour or 2 and it subsides, but it's still remaining, that is okay. And there are some where you do not want any sort of disturbance to occur. Obviously, you would want your airports to be resistant because that is, in essence, your primary entry points coming in for trade and for movement of people. So, for example, the Vieux-Fort River becomes important because you want to ensure that whatever happens on the River doesn't affect that critical infrastructure. That's what happened the last time, right? So You need to also ensure that, for example, the north of the island, where you have your main tourist stock,
Yes.
you want to ensure that that particular roadway is in fact resistant, because you don't want to have dislocation of people who have come in
And can't move.
and they can't move.
Correct.
So when you begin to look at your entire infrastructure stock, you then define what is critical. A road in the back of
Nowhere.
nowhere, all right, will not be defined as critical, because
Correct.
even if it falls apart, life goes on and the
Correct.
country's functioning is not affected.
Right.
So you define what is critical, and then you move to the other step and see, well, okay, what do we want to be resistant and what do we want to be resilient? And then you begin your whole process of design or reconfiguration or rehabilitation of your structures to make sure that it falls
And when
within
you
that
have
category.
your budgets, you know how to budget.
And then you know that. And also, when an event happens, you know what are the first points of attack,
Correct.
because you want to get the critical infrastructure repaired
Right.
so that your country can function. So I think that is important. That whole concept of critical infrastructure, the definition of what will be resistant, what should be resistant, and what should be resilient, that as a platform is required at this point in time because of our environment.
Correct.
So we start from there.
Yeah.
Then you mentioned the issue of maintenance, right? And we have a maintenance problem. I think it is undoubtedly so. That is very evident. The evidence is clearly seen and evident on the ground in St. Lucia that we are not, as a people, lending to the issue of maintenance. And it is even reflected in our own homes, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't maintain our homes as we should.
That's right.
So we have a culture that doesn't speak to maintenance,
Right.
which spills over into the national psyche. And is evident even in terms of how governments over the years have dealt with the maintenance of the infrastructure.
You know, John, it's funny that you should highlight about maintenance. Take, for instance, the Bois d'Orange Bridge, which is presently under construction. About 4 or 5 years ago, when it was first perceived that it was compromised. I'm not an engineer, but I went there at the time with, I think it was Guy Joseph who was the minister. I just happened to be passing, and I went under the bridge. I didn't see anything physically wrong with the bridge, but what I saw were big logs of wood across. And I did say to him, I said, you know, but why isn't this waterway being cleaned so that the water can flow? Because when you block one section, water will find another way to go. And what you're saying is you're so right, because evidently a lot of the problems we have today is lack of maintenance. Yeah.
And you speak specifically on the Rosalie Highway. That bridge was affected in 1994 during Debbie, and people don't know that.
Yeah.
There was indeed a failure on that bridge during Debbie.
As you talk of failures, John, it's being constructed now. After the failure you speak of, how dangerous was it?
Well, what happened in that time is that there was a hole that appeared to the top section of the Amco pipe, which caused some of the fill that was above to fall through, and there was a hole created.
Okay.
And what we did in that time was that we, obviously it was an emergency work, we filled it up with concrete.
Okay.
That was in 1994.
Right.
Subsequent to that, 4 or 5 years ago, you're correct, the ministry did recognize that further deterioration had taken place. And there was in fact some work done in trying to see how we can start the process of replacement. The problem with the Rosalie Highway as well as the East Coast Road, if you notice what is happening on the East Coast Road over the years, is that these Amco pipe sections have a design life of 40 to 50 years.
Got you.
And if you start looking at when those were done in the 1970s. The East Coast Road was done in the 1970s. If you observe what has happened on the East Coast Road is that you have had continuous collapse of those Amco pipes over that whole section from Dennery going right down to Viewford. And the same thing is going to happen on the Rosalie Highway also.
Right.
There's a culvert crossing at Bize, just after you, by American Drywall there.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
That nobody is looking at.
Right.
If you stand up by where Begas is and look inside of it,
Yes.
you'll be a little bit shocked at the condition. You then go to the Rodney Bay mall, the JQ Mall.
Yes.
There's another crossing there.
Okay.
Take a look inside. If you go on the car park side between Clark drugstore and the KFC,
Yeah.
that little bridge connecting, look inside. So there are issues along the Grosley Highway, even as we speak,
Yeah, that will come.
that can be catastrophic in terms of failure.
Question for you. You mentioned a while ago that these things have a lifespan.
It's have a lifespan.
Okay. But even with the lifespan, if they were well cared for, that could be
It could be extended.
It could be extended.
It could be extended. And
Okay.
part of it is, you know, it's a metal,
Yeah.
and obviously there will be corrosion.
Yes.
And one of the methods is to continually, you can use bitumen and place
Yeah.
that bitumen coating on the area where you would have the standing water, which is the critical area.
Right.
I would strongly suggest that a serious look be done on the existing crossings on the Grosley Highway, because there are some of them that fail. If the one that American Drywall fails, you have no bypass road.
That's right. Yeah.
That's catastrophic.
Yeah.
If the one by the Rodney Bay fails, it's serious dislocation of traffic.
Question for you, John. Only yesterday I was actually driving down on that road, and I was just wondering right where you have Key Largo, there's a road going there.
Yeah.
Could there not be a bypass, and it's not going to be permanent, so that cars can get through down there, even on an ordinary day, for instance, in the evening when you have all the traffic backing up? Could it be done as a sort of a bypass?
Well, I use it as a bypass. I mean, you can go through Key Largo and end up by Lafayette.
Okay.
You can drive through. There's a little bridge crossing there,
Right.
and many people use it.
Okay.
But the concept that you're having of creating these interlinkages
Yes.
is critical.
Definitely. Yeah.
And when you begin to look at
Heavy traffic on an area like that as well.
but also the concept of resilience and resistance. Interconnectivity helps, because there may be some structures that cost-wise you may not be able
Yes.
to upgrade to resilience or upgrade to resistance,
Right.
and a bypass may be helpful for you.
Correct.
So the interconnectivity is an important facet in the whole structuring of your infrastructure.
Yeah. Now, as we're talking about traffic jams and delays and so forth, I've continuously looked at these entrances by the JQ Mall, and am I dreaming to say that there should be a roundabout there instead of all this roads coming in? Would it help?
Well, I know that the ministry has looked at some traffic management plan
Yeah.
for that junction. I know that that's in progress.
Because the man hours lost there,
Man hours are
it's
significant.
phenomenal.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal.
And we should really take care of it. But what the points you made there are quite interesting, but also very worrying. Because if you say these things have a lifespan and they are starting to fail, all right, take for instance the one you talked about by the Bagas place at Bedbuté. Right now, what can be done as we speak?
Well, there is technology available in which you can reline the inside
Okay.
without, so you can actually reline.
Something we're going to have to be done. It's not going to last ad infinitum.
Yeah, but I'm saying that if you do not have, I mean, we don't have the financing to demolish that and replace it with a new bridge.
Okay.
So an alternative approach is to reline the inside, actually build another
I understand, like a whole...
the same Amco pipe
yes.
fitting snugly along the side of the failed one. That may be a cost-effective approach. to
Okay.
doing it.
As you brought that point up, something has come to my mind. You know, I watched, for instance, that bridge they just built up at Badawanj, by Bonte. Yeah. You know, to me, this is not a big bridge per se, because it's really like a ravine that went down there. Don't you think that we went a little bit overboard? And because some of my questions to you is micromanaging our limited resources. Now, just going back a bit, I am very hung up on Bailey bridges because A, they are cheap, B, they are quick to put up. Out of curiosity, if 2 Bailey bridges were put there and they leave it there for say 10 years or so, could that work? Just I'm asking a question.
Okay, well, let me back up again.
Sure.
Right? My concern with regards to the Bonte Bridge, as well as the Broad Orange Bridge, is do you require at this point in time to build a bridge to Four Lanes? Okay?
Yeah. I say the answer is no.
I say the answer is no also.
Yeah.
I'm saying that even if you said yes, and you look at the Bonte Bridge, even with the best will of the world, looking at the alignment is wrong.
Okay.
Right? If you're coming from...
Yeah, I've noticed that. I'm not an engineer and I can tell you that.
Yeah. All right?
Yeah.
So even if you're saying you're going to build a structure to accommodate four lanes, I would think that common sense would say to you that whatever your alignment would be for that new four lane, that structure should fit within that alignment. That's perfectly common sense.
Common sense,
right?
yeah.
So what's going to happen is that even if for some unholy reason, some government 40 years from now decides to put four lanes, which would require the demolition of all the buildings from either side, from VG to Cap Estate, on both sides, right? And they say, okay, well, we want to do this thing. You will still have to extend on that particular culvert crossing at Bonte to make that a reality.
John, you worked at the Public Works for 4 years. You should have a fairly good idea. I know governments change, administrations change, different ideas. But who makes the decisions to do those kind of things? May I ask?
Well, the point you made in terms of institutional memory, I think is a significant weakness. So something I was saying recently, that we have a serious problem in the country with regards to institutional memory, right? I can say over the years, I mean, I worked in the ministry for 6 years.
John, just one moment. We have to take a break.
Okay.
We'll be right back.